Hi, I'm Sean, and today I wanted to dive into Steel Inquisitors. Just as a general warning, I will be diving into spoilers about Mistborn Era 1 and 2, and just how the magic system works a little bit in general. So if you don't have any of that spoils and just have everything fresh, then go and come back to me in a couple years when you read the remaining COSMERE. But I just wanted to do some theorizing, talk about why I think they're just such a great villain and just idea or creature inside of this universe, and just to dive into them. So without further ado, let's dive in. Steel Inquisitors are definitely one of the cooler bad guys I've experienced, especially in Mistborn Era 1. They are the Inquisitors of a metal-based church that is literally worshipping a living tyrant god, and they look exactly what you would imagine that a twisted Inquisitor for a living tyrant of a god would look like. Generally bald, they have intricate tattooed faces, emphasizing the railroad-like spikes that have been driven through each of their eye sockets. Their bodies are strong, but very twisted, and if you were to strip them down, you would see 9 to 11 different spikes driven through various points of their body. And despite the lack of eyes and the spikes driven there, the body can still see the world around them and interact with it in a twisted, different kind of way. And they're real scary. I think that they function in the Mistborn series kind of like the litmus test for how strong a character is. Like in Wheel of Time, you had the merge roll, where if a character was able to finally best a merge roll after having them haunt you for so long, then you realize that that character was a very strong one. And that was a good way to see the actual power, because they are the like hand-picked servants of the Lord Ruler. They, with powers of Mistborn, they generally don't have a lot of competition. So when someone goes and actually is able to beat one, it's a holy shit moment. But to give you guys some context of this world, if you're not familiar with it, and just to give some framing for when I actually talk about the specifics of the Steel Inquisitors, I'm going to give some specifics about the Steel Ministry and how the magic system works before I get into the Inquisitor specific content. Just as a heads up, I'm going to keep this pretty high level. There are videos that I will link down below where they go into complete detail. All of these topics could be their own specific video. So rather than remake someone else's stuff, I just wanted to dial in on this aspect. And the Still Ministry is basically the Lord Ruler's church that worships him, a living Lord tyrant god, and is run more like a bank than an actual religion, which is pretty scary when you think about it. Everything is set in stone, everything's weighed, the laws are absolute. Imagine if you were going to confession and it was like IRS, the one that would come and collect on your sins. So absolute control, and this like allowed the Lord Ruler to have pretty strong grip over the populace. Now the Steel Ministry, that church had a few different aspects in it. You would have different cantons or different subsections of the church itself, and all of these, it would double as the bureaucratic government for the Lord Rulers. But these different cantons were the different departments of state for the Lord Ruler. You know, the finance would obviously handle the economy, the orthodoxy would handle the specifics about the religion, but the Canton of Inquisition, the one that we'll be honing in on today, was more of like the Gestapo or the street secret police. So they're the ones that would ensure the Lord Ruler's order and just do anything they can to snuff out the different Ska rebellions, and just in general would be pretty spooky. I don't think you can have a Inquisition without having any negative connotations. Or to actually become a Still Inquisitor, you have to join the Canton of Inquisition, and you would need to ride through the ranks before you would ever be deemed worthy to become a Still Inquisitor. They are a very chosen few. Emphasis on the chosen. So any member of these churches, there are some similarities. They would be called obligators. They have a thing about being shaved bald, and they get face tattoos to denote not only which canton they actually belong to, but what is their rank inside that canton. So even with the Steel Inquisitors, if you didn't know that they were an Inquisitor by the spikes going through their eyes, then if you paid enough attention to, the tattoos around them, you would be able to see that they were part of this Inquisition and were pretty highly ranked within the church. So if you join as a base level obligator and just continue to rise up with these ranks, by the time you get to right below them, then you can be chosen in a very violent and spectacular way that will leave your friends a little concerned when they find the remnants of that ritual. And that ritual, in order to fully understand it, we need to dive a little bit into hemalurgy. Like I mentioned before, there are people that went way in depth about this and have whole, very good put together videos that will dive into all the specifics of it, but I'm going to keep it as a base overview. If you want more info, definitely check the guy below. Now, hemalurgy is terrifying, but let's take a step back. Basically, in the COSMERE, how just a very blanket statement, is that the way investiture and these different powers work is that everyone has a spirit web. Very similar to chakras or a key or an energy flow that goes through the body, someone's identity, their soul, their connection to the different planes and shards and whatever, it is all nested within a spirit web. And basically, this gives some spoilers about how this works for like Mistborn and Stormlight, is that if you were to damage your spirit web enough, it opens up little breaks and cracks that investiture can then flow into. So in Mistborn, they had it called snapping. So if you went enough physical trauma, then your spirit web would become damaged enough where if you had that potential to be an allomancer, then you now have enough breaks inside of your spirit web for that investiture to flow into you. In Stormlight, you see that a lot of the Knights Radiants have to have some sort of mental illness or trauma in their past that they haven't got over because that emotional trauma was enough to also break open their spirit web. In your spirit web, depending on the different investiture that you basically have these like chakra bind points all over your body, and each one's associated with a different attribute and possibly different type of investiture. And depending on the metal that is used and the different bind point, then you have different investitures or powers that you would be able to steal. Knowing that you have these bind points that are connected to the different powers and different attributes, hemalurgy, and what makes this so terrifying is that you would be able to take a metal spike that is one of the allomantic metals and charging it up with enough intent, if you were to stab that through someone's bind point at that certain area and you had the right metal, then with hemalurgy you would be able to remove that power or whatever is in that bind point and charge it in the spike. And it's hemalurgy, you see that hema, Latin for blood, so there are a couple things you need to be aware of. So if the spike is outside of the body too long or not in blood, then the power that is being gained and then that spike will vanish very completely. With this, you're able to do some very spooky things, from stealing someone's identity, stealing whatever allomantic power it is, or just continuously to steal certain attributes to grant to someone else. In the case of the Steel Inquisitors, you have the ability to spike different powers outside of different allomancers and ferrochemists and just kind of put them in these spikes to be used in the Inquisitor or anyone who's using hemalurgy in general. And basically what this does is it rips out a piece of the spirit web of whoever gets stabbed and allows you to essentially staple it into somebody or something else. And depending on your intent, the metal, a bunch of other things, you can do some pretty crazy shit with it. And it's enough where you could dive in and kind of theory craft or meta break the COSMERE universe in such a way. And one of the big reasons why I wanted to make this video is because I don't think we're going to see the last Steel Inquisitors or even see their full power and potential. So with that info in mind, let's dive into the specifics of the Steel Inquisitors and how they relate to that hemalurgical process. Basic run-of-the-mill Steel Inquisitor has 9 to 11 spikes. Fun fact, if you have more than 4 spikes, then you will literally fall apart and die. Unless you have a iron spike that goes through and connects everything together, and for some reason that as long as you have that load balancing spike, you can go up to a lot more. But if you were just trying to steal more than 4 different powers through the spikes and you did not have that key linchpin spike, you'd be dead. With those 9 to 11 different powers, there are a few allomantic powers that, wouldn't be as necessarily good for combat, but in combat they will generally be on par with the average Mistborn. One of the spikes that you are able to grant is atium, so with the Lord Ruler being able to control the literal supply of atium, they generally will always have an edge even against like Mistborn people with higher powers, because they will generally have more atium than anyone else. And if you don't know, atium is a god metal where if you burn it as a Mistborn, you basically get precognition, so you can see the future, you can see your opponent's every different move. So in a fight, it's overwhelmingly like powerful. The only thing that you can really do with it is either burn atium yourself, which allows you to also see the future, so it winds up creating this like infinite mirror feedback loop that neither one gets the advantage, or you can burn something like Electrum, which basically does the same thing. It's called poor man's atium. You just don't get that added advantage of having that precognition towards others. It's just mainly like a counter alloy to atium. Something I only lightly touched on about the process of hemalurgy is the longer the spike is out of the body after stealing it, then the more power is drained from it. And so if you're trying to create a Steel Inquisitor, you don't want to have something that would be weaker than the victims they took it for. So the best way to maximize this and just keep everything going is to basically sandwich your victims and then just go directly through one straight into the other, just minimizing the loss of power. Now, hemalurgy is a negative magic system, so there's always going to be a little bit of loss with these, and there's no completely getting around to it, but by having them so close and spiking them, then you can just maximize the power that you're going to gain. And so, knowing that, then the way that Steel Inquisitors will operate in their ritual is that they will find someone or an obligator who is in their Inquisition that has shown great promise, and they will just show up one day, grab them, and then basically find 9 to 11 different mistings with the different powers, and they will basically just continuously like stab through 9 to 11 people, granting the victim, the lucky individual, the soon-to-be really high-powerful obligator, and just continuously staple people's spirit web into him in a very bloody, very carnage way. In the case of Marsh in the series, they actually think he died because they just found the meeting part that he was supposed to be. The Inquisitors found him first, and they just found the torn remnants of 11 different people, and they thought, like, obviously, he is in this pile of 11 bodies. We don't know where he is, but in all factual, he was just being turned into a Steel Inquisitor because he showed great promise. And there's some weird quirks to hemalurgy, because you're stabbing directly through the eyesights. You know, you have heart spikes, you have different spikes in the organs and stuff. That would make a lot of sense if someone put a railroad spike through your heart or your eyes, you would think that, hey, probably should be dead, but hemalurgy will cause the organs or whatever is in the way to actually twist around the spike and to save the person who is receiving the spike. I actually have some pet theories about this because Steel Inquisitors are known to be different or a little inhuman, so they're much more likely to be prone towards violence and be more sadistic, and the way they're described to be inhuman and just like moving in an alien way, I personally think that as some of these organs and brains and stuff is being rewired and moving around to make room for the spikes, that they are just fundamentally changing the human form and changing how their brain and body processes things. Something that's very interesting with how Brandon Sanderson set up his spirit web and the idea of identity is that in the spiritual realm, your identity will be what you think it is. So, like, if you were to, say, be a Knight Radiant and you had your arm chopped off, well, if in your whole self you view yourself as a complete different person, then you would grow the arm back, and that would be within the realms of healing. But if it had been so long that you view yourself without an arm, and that's who you are as a person, then you wouldn't be able to grow back that arm. So with that twisting, and the longer that you are still Inquisitor, I would have to imagine that your identity does become very warped, and that can also play some weird things with your identity and how you just view the world, and just in general how you're going to react to the world. You're a monster with spikes through your eyes, and everyone that you know or that you can actually relate to is sadistic, bloodthirsty monsters. It's gonna mess with your psyche. And this is where I think things get a little off the rails, and I have some cool theories about what could potentially happen, and it's just mainly me fanboying over the magic system once again. But just some background info. There are 47 known bind points on an Inquisitor that can receive power, and the Lord Ruler in the series was scared of his own creation, so he only used about 9 to 11 different spikes. He very much didn't want something to become more powerful for him and be able to overthrow his plans to save the world, so he tried to limit the one thing that could potentially overthrow his power. And you see with Ruin, whenever he gets released, that he has more control over the Inquisitors, so he decides that what would be, however powerful they are, they can't really compete with him as a shard slash god. So with them, he'll just continuously add ferrochemical powers to the mix. Now, if you wanted to grant every single allomantic and ferrochemical power, which honestly is not probably the most effective use of what you can, because there are some pretty useless powers in that mix to make something just purely combat focused. It would take about 32 different spikes, and you would need the binding linchpin spike, so 33. And that leaves you about 14 different spikes to play with. The big thing to be aware of is that for every spike in that spirit web, you damage it a bit more. And I talked about earlier about how damage can be caused by trauma and mental illness. Hemalurgy, with that ability of stapling into your spirit web, you gain more holes than you normally would. If you actually classify Still Inquisitors, then they wouldn't necessarily be human, but they would be a hemalurgical construct, like the Kandra or the Koloss. And we know in the series that If you had an Allomancer that had mental power strong enough that you could actually break into them and control them for a second. This is how the Lord Ruler managed to keep control of the Inquisitors, and later this was also the hook that Ruin used to control them. That's why he was so confident in granting them more and more powers. Now, the stronger your identity and willpower, the harder it is to control certain things, but we found in different series that when you have these shards and there is enough damage in the spirit web that they can go anywhere from whispering to just full on controlling your body. And so this is one of the drawbacks of hemalurgy. Like in cases like Marsh and Ruin, he had started out involuntarily got volunteered to become a Steel Inquisitor, and by the time the Lord Ruler was overthrown, he couldn't just relax and be like, all right, we're done. Instead, Ruin was like, I'm going to give you even more spikes, and you're going to go on a goddamn murder spree, and there's nothing you can do about it. So this is where I get into some theory territory. So Brandon Sanderson, I think, realized after he finished Mistborn Era 1, or maybe it was planned, but the allomantic, full-born, mistborn, ferrochemical, where you have all the powers, is a recipe for meta breaking and just constantly fans probably going, well, it's like, why didn't you do this? Or, as I mentioned in my video, 5 OP twin-born combinations that you can do some very meta-breaking things that if someone had that power, they could basically end the universe in certain ways or just overcome everything in just overwhelming power. And so one big classification that you do need to know is that after Sazed became Harmony, there are some limits put onto any future Steel Inquisitors that would be made. Basically, the way this works is that pre-Harmony, a Steel Inquisitor given enough powers would be able to theoretically compound his powers. I'm going to continue making absurd videos about how overpowering that is, but just in my last one, I mentioned about how you can become a black hole if you're committed enough. So anything past Harmony, then you no longer have that ability. Or if a Steel Inquisitor managed to kill enough Mistings and Ferris that they wouldn't be able to still have that super binding power. The way I understand it works is that Harmony is more preservation than Ruin, and so with that identity resonance is causing some issues with Ruin, so hemalurgy in general is just a little bit weaker, and that prevents it from having that ability to resonate. I'm still diving into the world of just being able to even like understand all these things, so there might be more to it. If there is, let me know in the comments down below. But even with that limitation, it's been confirmed that hemalurgy can work on different charts in different places, and it can still a lot more than just allomantic and ferrochemical powers. If you actually break into what it can do and look into there, it gets into some really weird, shady things, like with the spiritual metals. You can steal someone's identity, you can steal their connection, you can steal their destiny. There's just all these weird things that can actually do that hasn't been done yet, and we'll see what happens with them. But a Steel Inquisitor with, say, just full Allomantic and Mistborn powers, even though that's not optimized, he'd be a pretty terrifying sight, but if you were to go have him fight against Knight Radiant, he'd still be at a disadvantage just with the flight and a couple of other really powerful powers that they have in their own thing, but there's nothing stopping him from stealing a Shard Blade. Like if there is a Dead Sprint Shard Blade and he can steal it, then that's now a Steel Inquisitor with the Shard Blade. Someone had asked before if it would be possible to actually steal a Radiant Sprin, and Sanderson said you would have to actually steal the bond of that Surge Binder and something for the Sprin in order to do it, but there'd be pretty weird consequences of actually doing it, but that wasn't a no. So when you start getting into what hemalurgy can't steal, boons and curses, if you're good enough you can steal just the boon without the curse, then you will have these like really overpowered killing machines that are not only masters of whatever ferrochemy, alchemy, and sadistically bloodthirsty, but then you start getting into the weird territory, and no one's really fully used hemalurgy to its full effect. It's been confirmed that if you wanted to shoot spikes out of a gun, if you had the right intent, then you could actually use that. So if you were to take, per se, a aluminum spike with the intent that you were going to stake that person in front of you that was a Mistborn, and you gave it the right intent and hit it in the right spot, then you could literally take all of their powers and make them powerless for when that spikes in. I don't know what would happen after you remove it, but if you're in a combat situation and you're able to rob someone completely of their investiture in that combat situation, that is ridiculous. I think too, and this is where I'm getting to theorizing, because Marsh is still around even much later in Mistborn Era 2, and he is the only Steel Inquisitor now that has the ability to compound and just be able to wreak havoc. And him and Harmony are friends, so like they don't really have that type of control on there, but we do see hints of different shards coming towards and exerting influence. So, you know, if there is a big bag shard that is trying to destroy everything and he's looking for tools specifically in that fight, and someone made a still Inquisitor, maybe they picked up hemalurgy just to like gain their own powers and fight for whatever cause they believe just, well, you just gotta like foothold into being able to have a shard basically ride you like a puppet. And even if you will super strong, it will take you a while to break out of that. So with the knowledge that a major shard would have and knowing what he could about whatever you could do with hemalurgy, with the right intent, spikes, and just knowledge, you could do some very savage, horrific things. And I think that in later on in this series that we're going to see hemalurgy come back and just be used in just really crazy ways, and I'm super excited to see it. So like I mentioned, there are some people who are diving deep into the COSMERE lore, and I've already done some videos on this. I try to give it my own spin and just wanted to dive around just the concept of the Still Inquisitor and why I think it's just so cool and some general background. But I'm going to be doing more of these type of videos in the future. I definitely want to do some stuff with Hyperion and some of the other series I read. I really like a really well-written villain character. Or if it's a cool monster that is quantified and is more than just that thing hiding in the back, but actually has some logic and stuff, then awesome thing to dive into. I love seeing how some of these world-building elements really come together and just how these boogeyman just interact with the world around them, because well, unlike, you know, what your mom would tell you, you look under the bed and there's nothing there. In some of these worlds, you look under your bed and there's something horrific underneath it. And just especially for Sanderson's universe, like he generally doesn't do anything really horror based, and I think this is one of like the first examples of something that if you just objectively look at it, it's like pretty horrifying. And you know, it gives me very similar vibes to the Murdoll and some of the creepy things that you saw in Wheel of Time, and just in general, it's a really cool concept. But I'm going to link all those people that I saw down below. Definitely the Racco channel, if you're not aware of it. He has made his entire channel, it seems like, just dedicated to how the different magic systems and lore and just everything COSMERE is going on. And the few videos that I've seen, I was actually just proud I understood what he was talking about just for making some of these videos. But if you just want to go on a full-on rabbit hole deep dive, definitely check him out. He's a bigger booktuber, but just awesome content. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed it, and as always, take it easy.